I don't mean no disrespect, but no way. I can't listen to you, I do this my own way. This is not a game, no, I don't play. And you wasn't game before, so now it's no way. No way. No way. No way. Don't ask me for this, don't ask me for that. Let's ice in the safe, get iced if you chat. I might flip my wrist, I might flip your stack, I might steal your chick and then give her back.
Hey yo, what's going on YouTube? Thank you for tuning in. It's your boy Copper Color Ty. Today's video, the US provides about $90 billion to Ukraine for the war they are having with Russia. So I just wanted to dig a little bit deeper into this topic. What about us? So without any further ado, thank you for tuning in. This is Copper Color Ty. Let's get it.
For the future of U.S. cooperation with Ukraine. The two leaders met earlier today in the Oval Office to discuss the ongoing conflict, including Ukraine's battlefield capabilities and training the U.S. will continue to supply. President Biden at that meeting announced a new $1.85 billion military aid package that will include, for the very first time, a Patriot missile defense system. The U.S. has provided so far more than $65 billion in economic and military assistance to Ukraine, and lawmakers later this week are set to vote on a year-end spending package that includes another $45 billion in emergency assistance. Zelensky's trip comes 10 months into a brutal war launched by Russia. It has left tens of thousands of those in Ukraine injured or killed, devastation across much of the countryside, and damage to much Ukrainian infrastructure.
Let's rephrase this. Before we began spreading the lies of the deadliest mass terrorist bombings and shootings in U.S. history and world history, give an example: U.S. history, 9/11 and the Pentagon, deadly mass terrorist attacks. Example of world history, Russian invasion of Ukraine, Arab-Israeli conflict, war on terror, deadly mass terrorist attacks. But before we begin spreading the lies of the deadliest mass terrorist bombings and shootings in U.S. history and world history, let's not forget all the deadly mass terrorist bombings, shootings, massacres, and invasions that happened to the Negro people of America all across America. Who committed these terrorist attacks, such as the Tulsa, Oklahoma bombing? Foreign, European, and Spaniard people, now known as Americans, and the U.S. government. The same U.S. government giving Ukraine $91 billion to better their economic situation and to better their military. In other words, this is just another huge stimulus package the U.S. government is providing to other foreign nations of people. Considering all the deadly mass terrorist attacks and invasions the U.S. government and other foreign Europeans have committed against our people, we still have not received this type of financial support or military aid. Considering all the honorable contributions our people, ancestors, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents have made to make America what it is today, blood, sweat, tears, and death, the U.S. government still has never provided $91 billion to establish and better our own military and to better our economic situation, specifically for the Negro people of America. So because Russia has launched a brutal war against Ukraine, the U.S. government has provided Ukraine with $65 billion in economic and military assistance, a year-end spending package that includes another $45 billion in emergency assistance and a $1.85 billion military aid package that will include a Patriot missile defense system. What about the same foreign U.S. government providing this $91 billion to Ukraine, launching a brutal war against the Negro people of America over 100 years ago, which has left tens of thousands of American Negroes injured and killed. Grandmothers, grandfathers, mothers, fathers, children, and babies. Devastation across much of the American countryside and the countless amount of damage to much of the Negro infrastructure. All these different mini paragraphs sliding across the screen are many of the brutal, deadly terrorist attacks committed by foreign European people and the European U.S. government. Can someone tell me, where is our $91 billion economic military aid stimulus package? Come election time, I guarantee you're going to see some of our silly brothers and sisters still go vote for these corrupt people and politicians, keeping them in office and keeping our own people suppressed.
An additional $400 million in military aid to Ukrainian forces, and Ukraine now receiving 4 more long-range rocket systems. ABC's James Longman is in Kyiv with more on how these weapons could help tip the scales against the Russians. James.
4 more HIMARS are being sent here to Ukraine. These are the high-precision US rocket systems that we've seen deployed here and are already making a difference in this war. They can fire 6 rockets at the same time at targets of more than 40 miles away, and they can be fired from the backs of trucks, making them much more mobile. The US is also providing 1,000 precision artillery rounds. All this is meant to help stop Russia.
They didn't give us anything to defend ourselves with. Tell me, what was given to the Negro people of America to help stop the European people and the U.S. government from all their invasions and terrorist attacks against us? We Negro people of America never received any type of help. This was all swept under the rug and still is being swept under the rug to this present day. All this is kept quiet. The National Guard, aka government, police department, mobs, and clans were all involved in many of these terrorist attacks. And you mean to tell me we don't deserve any type of support non-Americans are receiving? They want us to forget about it because if we obtain, recover all documents and archived paperwork destroyed and stolen, we will see much of the land, different cities, towns, and businesses belong to us. We will see many of us were meant to be heirs to successful multi-million and billion-dollar empires. This is why many people say it's over and done with. It doesn't matter. It's not worth investigating. Forget about it.
Let's take a look at some of the military aid US has already sent to Ukraine in its bid to defeat Russia. 8,500 Javelin missiles, which became Ukraine's key counter-offensive. US produces these at a rate of about 1,000 per year and is obviously now running low. The US government placed an order for the missiles in May for $350 million, but it will still be a while before the stockpiles are refilled. Unknown quantity of surface-to-surface unitary warheads used by the 38 US high-mobility artillery rocket systems, 1,400 Stinger anti-aircraft systems, 2,500 precision-guided 155mm artillery rounds, 880,000 NATO standard artillery rounds, or 75% of the total amount delivered by all Western nations. The Pentagon intends to boost production of these shells from the current monthly average of 14,000 to 36,000 within the next 3 years. Now, even if US succeeds in doing so, their annual production will still be less than half of what they've already given to Ukraine over the past 7 months. So let's make it a bit clear. Aid to Ukraine will help US put up a kind of proxy resistance against Russia. Meanwhile, the Taiwan Policy Act of 2022 will enable US to bolster Taiwan's defense capabilities, which again will help US against China. US has also rekindled ties with Pakistan, providing major flood relief and a $450 million military sustainment package for upgrading Pakistan's fleet of F-16 fighter jets. The US has done this with the possible aim to closely monitor Pakistan's neighbor Afghanistan, another country where US has had a fallout. Basically, these deals and transfers serve the twin purposes of waging proxy wars and helping boost the US defense industry. US defense industry expects to make some big bucks with several export deals in the pipeline. Japan, Australia, South Korea, Singapore. They're all lining up for American-made defense equipment in 2022.
This is similar to what Martin Luther King was talking about. The U.S. government giving away millions of acres of land, millions of dollars, money to build colleges, county agents, low interest rates, providing an economic floor to all foreign people, but nothing for the Negro people of America. Because Russia has launched a war against Ukraine, the U.S. government is providing an economic floor and military aid for Ukraine, but the U.S. government continues to turn their cheek when it comes to the economic floor and military aid they've been owing us over 100 years now. To all my brothers and sisters, why are we still voting for these corrupt people, keeping them in office and participating in their crazy agendas? What are we not understanding or seeing? The U.S. government has provided $4.5 billion to Taiwan, a $450 million military sustainment package to Pakistan, 150 air-to-air missiles for Japan, $293 million Raytheon Technologies, 80 air-to-surface missiles for Australia, $235 million Lockheed Martin, 31 lightweight torpedoes for South Korea, $130 million in laser-guided bombs and munitions for Singapore. As we all can see, the U.S. government could have provided what they owe to the Negro people of America a long, long time ago, but instead they choose to discriminate us.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And this is what we are faced with, and this is a reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
We have since the start of this conflict, we're going to continue to do whatever it takes to give them the capacity to defend themselves.
The United States has vowed to support Ukraine in all ways possible to fight off Putin's forces. Bolstered by the midterms, Biden says the US will do whatever it takes to help Ukraine defend itself. Will the Republicans force Biden to reconsider the flow of US dollars in aid to Ukraine? But how much has the US really spent on the Ukraine war? Since Russia launched its invasion in February, the US Congress has approved tens of billions in emergency security and humanitarian assistance for Ukraine. The Biden administration has shipped billions worth of weapons and equipment from US military inventories. According to Kiel Institute, a German think tank, the US has transferred military and non-military aid worth $54 billion to Ukraine so far. Now, the Biden administration has asked Congress to provide over $37 billion in emergency aid to Ukraine, which would put the total aid at a whopping $91.43 billion. This amount is larger than the GDP of the US state of Maine, for example, and even countries like Sri Lanka. In fact, even the GDP of Ukraine before the war stood at around $200 billion US dollars. Another statistic that highlights the leading role taken by the US in aiding Ukraine is a comparison with aid sent by other nations. While the US's aid to Ukraine stands at $91.43 billion, European Union member nations and institutions together have provided $30.45 billion to Ukraine. The United Kingdom ranks second on the list, pledging less than $4 billion, far less than America. However, both countries' military aid commitments amount to approximately 0.1% of either country's respective GDPs. In fact, if GDP is taken as a metric, Ukraine's neighbors have contributed more to its war effort. For instance, Poland's military aid to Ukraine amounts to 0.3% of its GDP, while Latvia's military aid amounts to 0.9% of its GDP. However, the US's combined military, financial, and humanitarian aid delivered or pledged to Ukraine adds up to 0.25% of the country's GDP. Other big donors of military aid to Ukraine are Germany and Canada, even though their relative pledges only amount to 0.03% and 0.06% of their respective GDPs. The US total aid of $91.43 billion is more than Russia's most recent annual defense spending of $77.7 billion. President Putin, however, is looking to spend far more on the military in the next 2 years than initially planned. A defense expert at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, told Reuters that the total US price tag for the Ukraine war is relatively small, considering the Pentagon's $800 billion annual budget. He said, and I quote, "Many strategists, and I would put myself among them, would say this is a reasonable amount of money and it's cost effective," unquote. It's also pertinent to note here that the US may be spending billions more if they were involved directly in the conflict. The US government spent nearly $2.313 trillion in operations in Afghanistan and Pakistan until the Taliban took over in 2021. The US government spent nearly $73 billion in military aid to Afghanistan, billions more on the country's reconstruction, and approximately $837 billion just going to war. In comparison to the amount spent in Ukraine, the Biden government committed to investing just $44.9 billion to tackle the climate change crisis. Now to student loans. The Biden administration's student loan relief program is estimated to cost an average of $30 billion annually over the next decade. With the Republicans set to take control of the House, there is apprehension that the US may tighten the purse strings vis-a-vis Ukraine. On the 17th of November, Republican lawmakers vowed to give more scrutiny to financial support for Ukraine once they take control of the House of Representatives in January 2023. House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, who's poised to take over as Speaker in the House, earlier warned that the GOP is not going to write a blank check to Ukraine. With reports emerging of the US secretly pushing Ukraine to hold talks with Russia, the question is the US developing war fatigue? Or will the funds continue to flow to Ukraine?
Mark Kansian, a defense expert, says the total United States price tag for the Ukraine war is relatively small considering the Pentagon's $800 billion annual budget. If this is true, the United States has $91 billion to give to Ukraine, more millions and billions of dollars to give to other foreign nations of people, but not one single million or billion dollars to give back to the Negro people of America, not one single million or billion dollars to go towards the economic floor they destroyed, the economic floor and economic empires stole from us that we established on our own for our people and future generations to come. Out of this $800 billion annual budget, not $1 billion, not $1 million has been given back to us for all of our pain and suffering. Nothing has been given. But the U.S. government has the funds and military aid for foreign nations of people. That sounds like discrimination. The U.S. government has been giving away billions and millions of dollars to other foreign continents due to the previous wars for reconstruction, but they have not given us not $1 billion for the reconstruction damages they caused, not even $1 million. Total discrimination. Again, the U.S. government still has not given us anything.
Against all odds and doom and gloom scenarios, Ukraine didn't fall. Ukraine is alive and kicking. Thank you. And it gives me good reason to share with you our first joint victory. We defeated Russia in the battle for minds of the world. We have no fear, nor should anyone in the world have it. Ukrainians gained this victory, and it gives us courage, which inspires the entire world. Americans gained this victory, and that's why you have succeeded in uniting the global community to protect freedom and international law. Europeans gained this victory, and that's why Europe is now stronger and more independent than ever. The Russian tyranny has lost control over us. And it will never influence our minds again. Yet, we have to do whatever it takes to ensure that countries of the global south also gain such victory. I know one more, I think, very important thing. The Russians will stand a chance to be free only when they defeat the Kremlin in their minds. Yet, the battle continues, and we have to defeat the Kremlin on the battlefield. Yes, this battle is not only for the territory, for this or another part of Europe. The battle is not only for life, freedom and security of Ukrainians or any other nation which Russia attempts to conquer.
I am quite sure if our people were provided with $91 billion for all the deadly, brutal terrorist attacks committed against our people, many of our economic floors and economic empires would still be alive, standing, and kicking today. When it comes to the Negro people of America, the United States government has not succeeded in uniting the global community to protect freedom and international law. The U.S. government has disregarded international law when it comes to us Negro people of America. The U.S. government knew by destroying the economic floors we established would stop us and our future generations from being stronger than ever.
I don't mean no disrespect, but no way. I can't listen to you, I do this my own way.